My name is Jordan Briggs,
I'm 27 years old.
and for the last 7 years, I've been the one crawling under broken machines in the middle of nowhere, keeping other people's money from bleeding out into the dirt.
If you've never been to Midland, Odessa, let me paint it for you. Flat land in every direction.
Pump jacks nodding like tired old men who forgot how to stop working. Dust that settles into your skin so deep it feels permanent.
Out here, nothing cares about you.
Not the heat, not the cold, not the equipment that decides to fail at 2 a.m. on a lease road, 40 miles from the nearest gas station.
The only thing that matters is uptime.
And for a long time, I was the one delivering it.
I've slept in the cab of a service truck with my boots still on because taking them off felt like tempting fate. I've changed injectors in sideways rain with a flashlight clamped between my teeth, while some foreman stood behind me chain-smoking and asking every 90 seconds if I was almost done. I've bled on engines I never got credit for fixing, and I never complained.
Because this wasn't just a job. It was my father's company.
Briggs Equipment Services.
15 years ago, my dad, Arthur Briggs, built it from nothing with his brother Gerald.
50-50 partners.
My dad handled the field. Gerald handled the office.
Simple, clean, balanced, at least on paper. My dad wasn't a businessman. He was the kind of man who showed up.
Rain, hail, midnight calls. Didn't matter.
If he said he'd be there at 6, he'd be there at 5:55 with a wrench already in his hand.
That's how he built the company. Not with strategy, with trust. Gerald was the opposite. Pressed shirts, clean boots, the kind of man who could sit across from a banker and make numbers sound like promises.
My dad trusted him completely. That was the system. One built the reputation. The other managed it. Then my dad died.
Sunday morning.
Heart attack. No warning. No goodbye.
Just gone.
I was 25 when it happened.
And overnight, I became a 50% owner of a company I'd been working in since I was 16. At least, that's what the paperwork said. Reality looked different.
The day after the funeral, Gerald pulled me into the office.
He put a hand on my shoulder,
looked me straight in the eye, and said softly,
"Jordan, the best thing you can do right now is keep doing what you've been doing. Stay in the field. Keep the clients happy. Let me handle the business side."
He said it like he was protecting me,
like he was doing me a favor.
I was grieving. I was exhausted. So I said, okay.
That was my first mistake.
Because while I stayed in the field,
someone else started taking my place in everything that mattered.
Her name was Thea,
Gerald's daughter,
my cousin.
We started at the company around the same time, but we didn't take the same path.
Not even close.
While I was out in the dirt learning how to keep engines alive with whatever tools I had,
Thea was inside.
Air conditioning,
meetings,
networking lunches. She got business cards. I got a pager.
By the time I was 22, I was the one they called, when nobody else could figure something out.
The complicated jobs.
The expensive problems.
The ones where every hour of downtime cost thousands.
Thea,
she could talk.
That was her strength. She knew how to repeat things she'd heard in meetings like they were her own ideas. Operational efficiency. Strategic alignment. She said those words to men who had 30 years of grease under their nails. They'd nod politely, then look at each other the second she walked away. There was 1 week that summed everything up. Thea flew to Houston for a 3-day oil field conference. Company paid for everything. Hotel, food, registration. She came back with a lanyard full of business cards and a head full of buzzwords.
That same week, I worked 2 back-to-back 16-hour shifts, generators failing across half the basin during a cold snap. I slept in my truck because going home would have cost me 2 hours I didn't have. Friday, we both showed up at the shop. Gerald asked her how the conference went.
He didn't ask me anything.
That's when I should have seen it.
The pattern. The shift.
The quiet rewriting of who mattered.
But I didn't.
Not yet.
Because I was still thinking like my father.
Work hard.
Keep your head down. Do the job right. And eventually, it speaks for itself. Out here, that's not how it works. And I was about to learn that the hard way. After my dad died, Gerald didn't push me out all at once. That would have been too obvious. He did it slowly, quietly.
Like corrosion under paint.
First, company emails started coming from Thea. Operational updates. Client follow-ups, vendor notices. Her name kept appearing where mine used to belong.
Then Gerald started introducing her at industry events as the next generation of Briggs leadership.
Not part of the next generation. Not one of the people carrying the company forward. Just the next generation. Singular. Like I didn't exist. Like I didn't own half the company. At first, I told myself I was being sensitive. Grief does that to you. It makes you question your own reactions.
Maybe Gerald was just proud of his daughter.
Maybe Thea was learning.
Maybe I needed to stop taking everything personally.
Then Perry and Logistics happened. Perion was our biggest account. Nearly a third of annual revenue. and I had been their primary field contact since the day they signed. Their trucks were always throwing intermittent codes, the kind that never show up when you're staring right at them. The kind that make you want to rip your own hair out because the engine behaves perfectly until the driver is 40 miles away and furious. I spent 3 weekends in a row on that fleet, tracing wires, swapping sensors, running diagnostics, eating gas station sandwiches over open hoods while the wind turned my hands numb. By the 3rd weekend, my knuckles were cracked from degreaser, and I had connector diagrams spread across my kitchen table at midnight like I was planning a robbery. Finally, I found it. A bad batch of ECM connectors from a supplier shipment. I wrote everything up. Part numbers, failure patterns, replacement schedule, photos, notes, everything. Thea took that report to the next client meeting and presented it as a fleet health analysis she had been developing. Dale, Perrion's operations manager, emailed afterward thanking her for her thorough work. Gerald forwarded that email company-wide. Subject line, "This is what client leadership looks like." I read it standing in the shop with hydraulic fluid on my shirt. 10 feet away, Thea was laughing in the hallway while Gerald clapped her on the shoulder. "That Perrion email," he told her, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's the kind of relationship management that keeps this company growing." Thea smiled like she had earned every word. I didn't move. Mike, our shop foreman, was beside me rebuilding a valve assembly. He waited until Gerald walked away. Then he said without looking up, "3 weekends?" I swallowed. He tightened one bolt, then another. "That's what that report cost you, right? 3 weekends?" I didn't answer. He wasn't really asking. That was Gerald's talent. He never cut deep enough in public that you could call it a wound. Just enough to make you bleed quietly. A few weeks later, I landed us a referral from a satisfied client. A real one. A company with 6 trucks, 2 generators, and enough work to matter. Gerald pulled me aside in the shop hallway. He smiled, put that familiar hand on my shoulder, and said, "That's great, Jordan, really, but there's a difference between reliability and leadership. Your reliability, Thea's leadership, both matter." He said it like a compliment. It sat in my chest like a rock. The worst moment came during a quarterly meeting I had actually been invited to. I had spent nights putting together ideas for expanding our preventive maintenance contracts. Real numbers, projected revenue, client retention data, field-based problems with field-based solutions. I was halfway through explaining it when Gerald lifted his hand, smiling, calm, performing kindness for the room. "Jordan, honey, we love your energy," he said, "but you're a wrench girl, and I mean that as a compliment. Let the business side handle the business side." The room went quiet, not shocked. Just uncomfortable. The kind of silence people choose when they know something is wrong, but don't want to pay the price of saying it. Thea looked down at her notes. Gerald moved on like nothing had happened. And I sat there feeling like someone had patted me on the head in the middle of my own company. That night, I sat in my truck outside the shop long after everyone left. The dashboard lights glowed blue over my hands. Hands that had kept that company alive. Hands that had signed nothing. Hands that apparently didn't belong anywhere near decisions. For the first time, anger didn't burn hot. It went cold, clear, useful. So I went home and pulled out the operating agreement. Not Gerald's version, the real one. The one my father had signed. I read it at my kitchen table with a highlighter, a legal pad, and a cup of coffee that went untouched until morning. And there it was. Plain language. As a 50% member, I had the right to inspect the books. I was supposed to receive quarterly financial statements. Major decisions required approval. Loans, asset sales, changes to the agreement. I could call a members' meeting. Gerald had honored none of it. Not once. Not accidentally. Not because he forgot. Because the whole structure depended on me never reading the document. The next day, I bought a black composition notebook from a gas station. Nothing digital. Nothing connected to the company network. And I started writing everything down. Dates, meetings, emails, client contacts, financial statements I never received. Every time Thea was positioned as the future of a company I half-owned. Every time Gerald made a decision without me. The first person I told was Mike. We were in the shop after hours, finishing brakes on one of the service trucks. I was holding a work light while he torqued a caliper bolt. And I just said it. Something's wrong with how Gerald's running things. Mike didn't look up. He finished tightening the bolt, set the wrench down, then said, "I've been waiting 2 years for you to figure that out." I stared at him. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Clients don't call Briggs, Jordan. They call you." I didn't know what to say. Then he added quieter, "Your dad wouldn't have wanted you watching Gerald strip this place for parts." That sentence stayed with me. Because Mike wasn't dramatic. He didn't exaggerate. If he said something smelled wrong, something was rotting. And he had been watching too. Vendor prices that didn't make sense. New suppliers nobody in the shop trusted. Parts orders routed through the office instead of the channels Mike had built over 12 years. He couldn't prove anything yet, but the numbers felt off. So I found an attorney in Midland who specialized in business disputes. I brought him the operating agreement, my inheritance documents, my notebook. He read quietly for 20 minutes, then looked up at me and said, "Your uncle has been operating outside this agreement for 2 years." Hearing someone say it out loud did something to me. It made the betrayal real, not emotional, not imagined. Documented. The attorney told me I had grounds to demand a full accounting. Bank records, loan documents, vendor contracts, tax returns, everything going back to my father's death. So the next week, I sent Gerald a formal letter. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. A demand for inspection of books and records under my rights as a 50% owner. I gave him 30 days. That evening, Gerald called me. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Jordan," he said, "why are you sending legal letters instead of just talking to me? We're family." I looked down at the grease still under my fingernails. "I tried talking for 2 years," I said. "You treated me like an employee." He went silent. So I finished. "I want to see the books." For a few seconds, all I heard was his breathing. Then his voice changed. Flat. Cold. "Be grateful I let you work here." I almost laughed. "Let me work here. At the company my father built. The company I owned half of." My hand tightened around the phone, and for the first time, I didn't sound like the grieving daughter he was used to managing. I sounded like an owner. "Gerald," I said, "you're going to give me those records one way or another." The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was halfway under the hood of a Kenworth, elbows deep in a turbo actuator, when my phone buzzed against the metal frame hard enough to echo through the bay. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Jordan Briggs?" a woman's voice said when I picked up. "Yeah. This is Kara Whitfield from Basin West Bank. I just need to confirm a few details on a file." Her tone was neutral. Professional. Routine. I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned back against the truck. "Sure. You're listed as a key operator on the company's equipment financing and revolving credit line," she said. "The underwriting references you specifically." "That sounds right," I said. "I handle field operations." There was a brief pause. Then, "There's also a personal guarantee rider with your name on it." Something in my chest tightened. "What kind of rider?" "A personal guarantee," she repeated calmly. "Pledging personal liability for the company's revolving credit facility. Your name, your social security number, and your signature." For a second, I didn't understand what she was saying. Then it hit. Hard. Cold. Immediate. "When was that signed?" I asked. She gave me a date. 18 months ago. 6 months after my dad died. My fingers went numb. That was during what Gerald had called a routine bank renewal. Paperwork he told me not to worry about. "Kara," I said slowly, "I never signed a personal guarantee." Silence. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Calculation. "I'm going to need to flag this for internal review," she said carefully. "We'll pull the full submission trail on that document." I stared at the concrete floor, at the oil stains, at the place where I had spent years building something I thought was mine. "I'd appreciate that," I said. When the call ended, I didn't move. Not for a long time. For 18 months. My name had been tied to the company's debt. If anything went wrong, if a contract fell through, if the credit line defaulted, if Gerald made one bad decision too many, they wouldn't come after him first. They'd come after me. My hands started shaking. Not from fear, from something sharper. Violation. I called Kara back within the hour. "Do you know how it was submitted?" I asked. She pulled the file. "It came through as part of a renewal package," she said. "Electronic submission from the company's main office email." I closed my eyes. Whose account? Gerald Briggs. Of course. My signature block was already there? I asked. Yes. And the signing record? Another pause. Then, the document was completed from the same IP address as the rest of the submission. It doesn't match your email, your phone, or any device previously associated with your profile. I let out a slow breath. So it wasn't just suspicion. It was traceable. "Thank you," I said quietly. "We'll note everything," she replied. I didn't go home that night. I drove straight to my attorney's office and sat in the lobby until he could see me. He listened without interrupting. No reactions. No guesses. Just facts. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said 2 words. "That's fraud." Hearing it out loud didn't shock me. It clarified something I had already felt. "This changes everything," he continued. "Before, we had a breach of agreement. Now we have potential criminal exposure." He tapped the documents on his desk. "This gives you leverage." Leverage? That word settled differently than anger. It didn't burn. It anchored. We worked late into the night drafting 2 letters. The first went to Basin West Bank. A formal dispute, challenging the authenticity of the personal guarantee, demanding the original document and the full electronic audit trail. The second letter went to Gerald, and this one wasn't polite. It demanded full financial records within 10 days, written acknowledgement that the guarantee was submitted without my consent, a formal members' meeting to address management violations. At the bottom, my attorney added one line that mattered more than everything else above it. Failure to comply would result in legal action, including a petition to appoint a receiver to take control of the company. For the first time, Gerald wasn't managing the situation. He was reacting to it. I filed a police report the next morning, not because I expected immediate action, but because documentation matters. Paper trails matter, and I was done being invisible. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, credit report pulled up, line by line, every account, every inquiry, every number. I didn't find anything else. No hidden accounts, no new loans, nothing. But the fact that I had to sit there wondering what else might be tied to my name without my knowledge, that feeling stayed. Gerald responded 3 days later, not with compliance, with a counterattack. His attorney's letter claimed, I had verbally authorized him to handle banking matters. The guarantee was standard business practice. My actions were disruptive and harmful to the company. And then, at the end, a quiet threat. He questioned whether my declining field performance justified my continued role in the company. I read it twice, then handed it to my attorney. He smiled. Actually smiled. You can't verbally authorize someone to forge your signature, he said. That's not how any of this works. He tapped the page. And threatening to remove a 50% owner because they caught you committing fraud? He leaned back. That's not strategy, that's panic. For the first time since my dad died, I felt something shift. Not grief. Not anger. Control. We filed for emergency injunctive relief the next day. A motion to freeze major company decisions, force Gerald to produce financial records, prevent him from removing me. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, and in the meantime, the bank started applying pressure. Basin West flagged the company's credit file. The guarantee dispute triggered an internal review. And just like that, the revolving credit line went on hold. For most companies, that's inconvenient. For ours, it was oxygen, parts inventory, equipment purchases, payroll during slow months. All of it ran through that line. Now it had a clock attached to it. I stood in the shop the next morning, watching the trucks come and go, listening to the same sounds I'd heard for years. Wrenches, engines, voices. But something was different now. For 2 years, I had been reacting, working harder, trying to prove something, trying to earn space in a place I already owned. That was over. If Gerald wanted to run the company without me, he was about to find out exactly what that looked like. The first thing I did was stop. No announcement, no confrontation, no dramatic exit. I just stopped doing everything that wasn't officially mine to do. No more midnight callouts. No more answering my phone at 2 a.m. because some foreman was panicking over a dead generator. No more covering gaps in scheduling because Thea didn't know how to run dispatch. No more unpaid hours keeping a system alive that didn't even acknowledge me. If a job wasn't on my schedule, I didn't touch it. If a call came in after hours, I forwarded it to the office line. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was doing exactly what my job description said. Turns out, my job description had been carrying about 30 extra hours a week of invisible labor. At first, nothing happened. The system kept moving. Momentum. That's the thing about machines. They don't fail the second you stop pushing them. They coast. For a few days, it almost looked like everything was fine. Then the cracks started. A crane truck went down on a pad site. Thea dispatched one of the junior techs. He couldn't diagnose the issue. Called her. She couldn't help him, because she had never worked on a crane truck in her life. 4 hours of downtime. 5 figures bleeding out of a client's pocket. That night, the client called me directly. Of course he did. That's who they always called. Jordan, he said, can you take a look at this? I leaned back in my chair, stared at the ceiling, and for the first time, I didn't fix it. All service requests need to go through the main office, I told him. Then I gave him the number. There was a pause, then a quiet laugh. Not amused, just understanding. The next morning, Mike pulled me aside. Not to argue, not to convince me to step in, to show me something. He turned his phone toward me. A text thread with one of our vendors. The vendor was asking if the company was going through changes. Why would they ask that? I said. Mike didn't answer. He scrolled. Another message. This one from a client's fleet coordinator, asking why I was transitioning out of the company. I felt something tighten in my chest. Who told them that? Mike looked at me. You already know. Gerald and Thea weren't just pushing me out. They were rewriting the story.
making it look like I chose to leave, so no one would ask why the person actually running operations was suddenly gone.
I let out a slow breath.
Good, I said.
Mike raised an eyebrow.
Let them talk, I continued. Just don't correct them. Because if they wanted to prove they could run the company without me, I was going to let them.
The real collapse came a week later.
Perry & Logistics, a Peterbilt 389 hauling a loaded lowboy down Highway 385.
15 miles into the run, the diesel particulate filter flagged a regen fault. Engine started derating, losing power.
Driver pulled over.
Called dispatch. Dispatch called Briggs. Thea took the call.
If I had taken it, it would have been a 90-minute job.
DPF sensor. Standard issue.
I'd handled it dozens of times. Instead,
Thea sent a junior tech with the wrong tools.
The kid got on site.
Couldn't pull the right codes.
Didn't have the software.
Didn't have the equipment.
Didn't even know what he was looking at.
He called Thea. She told him to clear the codes. He couldn't. Called again. She told him to wait.
That truck sat on the side of the highway
For 6 hours. 6. Half in the lane. Half on the shoulder. Just enough to make every passing driver furious. By hour 3, a county sheriff showed up. Walked to the driver's window.
Gave him 45 minutes to move the truck or face a tow.
Perry and dispatch called Briggs again. No answer. They called again. No answer. Third call. Voicemail. Meanwhile, that skid steer on the lowboy, it was supposed to be at a new site that morning. Foundation work. Everything delayed because one truck couldn't move. Penalty clause kicked in. $1,000 per hour. By the time a second tech arrived with the right equipment, it was already dark. By the time the job was done, the damage was permanent.
$22,000 in penalties.
For a job that should have taken 90 minutes. Dale called me that night.
Not Gerald.
Not Thea.
Me.
Jordan, he said, voice flat. We just lost 22 grand because your company doesn't know what it's doing anymore. I closed my eyes. What do you need from me? I asked. There was a pause. Then,
I need to know when you're the one making decisions again.
I didn't answer right away, because that question
was the entire situation.
There's a legal dispute happening, I said finally. It'll be resolved soon. Another pause. Shorter this time. Colder. I don't care about your family situation, Dale said. I care about my trucks running. The line went quiet. Then he added,
Until that happens, I'm looking at other options.
2 days later, the email came in. Perry & Logistics. Formal notice. Contract suspended. Immediate effect. 60-day termination clause. In our industry, that's not a warning. That's a death sentence. I stood in the shop holding that email, listening to the same sounds as always. But now, they felt different. Because this time, the system wasn't breaking around me. It was breaking without me. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks after we filed. Right on time. I didn't sleep much the night before. Not because I was nervous. Because I was steady.
The kind of steady that only comes after everything has already broken.
The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Quiet. Controlled. Nothing like the chaos that had been building behind the scenes. Gerald sat across from me. Pressed shirt. Calm expression. Like this was just another meeting he could talk his way through. Thea sat beside him. Still. Silent. For the first time since all of this started, she didn't look like she had anything to say. My attorney spoke first. Clear. Direct. No emotion. He laid everything out. The operating agreement violations. The absence of financial disclosures. The pattern of excluding me from decisions. The forged personal guarantee. Then he presented the DocuSign audit trail. Timestamps. IP address. Submission records. All pointing back to Gerald.
Gerald's attorney tried to frame it as a misunderstanding.
A family disagreement. A communication breakdown. The judge didn't entertain it. She flipped through the documents. Paused.
Then looked directly at Gerald.
The agreement is clear, she said.
And the evidence is very clear.
Silence filled the room. Not dramatic. Just final. She granted the injunction. Gerald was ordered to produce all financial records within 14 days. Major company decisions were frozen. He was prohibited from removing me or limiting my access. Then she added something that shifted everything. If these findings hold, she said, I will consider removing you as managing member.
For the first time.
Gerald looked scared.
The records arrived on day 13.
Boxes. Files. Years of decisions I had never been allowed to see. My attorney and I went through everything, line by line.
It was worse than I expected.
Unauthorized management fees. Personal expenses run through the company. Vendor contracts with inflated pricing. Suppliers tied to Gerald's personal relationships. One stood out immediately.
A parts supplier he switched to 8 months after my dad died.
Supposedly for better pricing. It wasn't. The invoices showed costs 12 to 15% higher than standard. I asked Mike to pull old quotes from his contacts. He did. The difference was undeniable. Tens of thousands of dollars. Gone. Not by accident. Self-dealing, my attorney said. Breach of fiduciary duty. Legal terms. Clean. Clinical. What they meant was simple. He had been using the company to benefit himself. While telling me to be grateful, I was allowed to work there. We had enough to drag this through court for years. Expose everything. Every document. Every decision. Every lie. But there was a faster way. We made Gerald an offer. 2 options. Fight us in court and risk everything becoming public, including the fraud. Or walk away. He would transfer his 50% ownership to me in exchange for a structured payout over 5 years. Seller financing. Clean. Contained. Conditions. Immediate resignation from all roles. Thea removed from the company. No interference. No contact with clients or vendors. Gerald tried to negotiate. Of course he did. He wanted more money. He wanted Thea to stay. He wanted a title. Consultant. Advisor. Something that made it look like he hadn't lost. My attorney didn't move. The offer stands, he said, or we'll see you in court. 48 hours later, Gerald accepted. The day the paperwork was signed, I walked into Briggs Equipment Services as the sole owner. Nothing looked different. Same shop, same trucks, same smell of diesel and metal. But everything felt different. Mike was waiting near the workbench. He looked at me, nodded once. That was enough. Thea cleaned out her desk that afternoon. No speech, no argument. She packed everything into a box, walked past me without looking up, and left. Just like that. I called Dale that same day. It's done, I told him. I'm running things now. Silence. Then, you get 1 shot, he said. A trial contract. Smaller. Limited scope. Not trust. Not yet. Just possibility. The first job? On time. Right parts. No mistakes. Dale sent a 1-line email after. That's what I remember. That was enough. The next 6 months were work. Real work. Not survival. Rebuilding. Calling clients back. Earning trust again. Fixing relationships that had been damaged while I wasn't allowed to protect them. Some came back immediately. Some took time. Some never returned. That's the thing about trust. Once it breaks, you don't get all of it back. Micah and I cleaned up the vendor accounts, cut the inflated contracts, rebuilt supplier relationships, 3 weekends straight. This time, I didn't mind the hours, because now they meant something. The bank removed the forged guarantee after the ownership transfer. New rules. 2 signatures required for anything like that moving forward. No more blind trust. Just structure. Accountability. Proof. We rebuilt the credit line. Proper paperwork. Real signatures. Kara called me after it was finalized. Looks like things are back where they should be, she said. Better, I replied. We promoted from within. Hired carefully. Built slow. No shortcuts. No illusions. Just work. I kept the name. Briggs Equipment Services. Because my dad built that. Not Gerald. I did change one thing. The logo. Added the year my dad started it. Right under the name. A reminder of where it came from and who it belongs to. The first time I deposited a check with my name as sole owner, I sat in my truck outside the bank for 5 minutes, just looking at it, not smiling, not celebrating, just breathing. Some nights I still think about my dad. Wonder what he'd say if he could see all of this. I don't think he'd talk about the court case or the money. I think he'd just ask one thing. Did you protect it? And now I can answer that. Yeah, I did.